I grew up Korean, but I was Jewish, but my mother was Buddhist, but my emos were Christian. So it was like.
I'd now like to invite Rabbi Angela Buchdahl from Manhattan to lead us in blessings and candle lighting. Rabbi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm tremendously honored to be here with you and with Mrs. Obama. I would say that our founding fathers, they wanted and aspired to build a country that was truly a place of religious freedom and equal opportunity for all people. But I have to predict that they could not have imagined that in 2014 that there would be a female Asian American rabbi lighting the menorah at the White House for an African American president. So I say,
You don't mean they predicted that?
I think they would be. I think they'd be surprised.
Really?
Mom would be very proud that I'm here, speaking as a Hanguk Saram. So, as you heard, I was born between two worlds in an army base hospital near Seoul, and I have this Korean Buddhist mother. She was actually born in Japan, but moved to Korea when she was about 5. And my Jewish father. And my mom was an English major at Ewha University, and my father did ROTC, and was stationed in South Korea. So that's how they met and then eventually got married. I had my first 4.5 years. I lived in Korea speaking only Korean. I lived with my halmoni and my parents and a lot of cousins. It is not very easy to be a half-breed in Korea, in the Hermit Kingdom. And not only that, there's a lot of prejudice in particular for American Korean mixed children. And there was no Jewish community at all. So for all of these reasons, at 5, basically, we moved to Tacoma, Washington, which is where my father's family was from. The irony is they moved to Tacoma, which actually has a bigger Korean population than Jewish population. So that was very lucky for my mom because she got very, very deeply involved in the Korean community there. My emos, we brought over 2 of my emos to America, to Tacoma. They all lived in my house first. You know how that goes for Koreans, they lived in my house for 6 months and then they moved to their own house. My emos, when they came, everyone was raised Buddhist, but they all got deeply involved in the Korean church community as a social outlet, and then each of them converted to Christianity. One of them, my aunt, became truly born again, and she became a Korean minister. And so she's still very active as a Korean minister and had a small Korean church. So you can imagine what it was like for me. I grew up Korean, but I was Jewish, but my mother was Buddhist, but my emos were Christian. So I was a religious studies major because it was a form of therapy for me. So I was I had to learn what was going on. Now you can take my mother out of Korea, but you can't take the Korean out of my mother. She was a tiger mom before that term was coined. She made me take piano lessons at the age of 5. She had a very strong, kind of almost impossible work ethic. She taught me to live with a lot of respect and deference for elders. Very important. She drilled that into us that this was the key to everything, was education. And luckily, Jewish and Korean values are very similar, especially around these ideas around education and how we think about our tradition and preserving tradition and all of those things. Sometimes there were times where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere, and instead my mom kind of encouraged me to think of the fact that I could belong everywhere and I could take the best of my Korean side and the best of my Jewish side. So I do think I have a really strong sense of deference and loyalty to my parents and a sense of respect for elders, and a part of me that also probably what allowed me to say at age 16, when someone told me I wasn't Jewish when I was on an Israel trip. It was the first time I went to Israel. It was the first time I met Jews who were much more traditional than I were. And they said, if you don't have a Jewish mother, that's how Jewish law traces your identity. So they said, you're not actually a Jew. I don't have a Jewish name, Angela. I don't have a Jewish face. I said, I could just stop being Jewish right now, and no one would even notice. I think that part of me that was Jewish, instead of sort of like ascribing to that, was like, oh, I'll show you how Jewish I am. I'm going to become a rabbi. And I came home from that trip and I told my mom that I wanted to be a rabbi. And she knew how much pain I had been through in my Israel trip, like how I felt rejected by fellow Jews on my trip, how I felt inauthentic as a Jew. And by the way, that identity crisis like lasted for quite a while. I remember telling my mom I wanted to be a rabbi, and she's not the kind of person who cries, but she teared up and she just said, why do you want to put yourself through that? Like, why do you want to put yourself into a community that has rejected you like this? And it wasn't until she sort of challenged me that I realized that being Jewish was as much who I was, and I could no sooner stop doing that than stop being a woman, or stop being Korean, or stop being who I was. So I'm just going to fast forward and say that like there's a long line between age 16, when I wanted to be a rabbi, to New York, where I came to Central Synagogue. But I will say that in 2014, I took my place leading this congregation, which is now 2,600 families, which is 7,000 people big. It's the largest synagogue in New York and one of the 3 largest synagogues in the world. And I'm the only woman leading any synagogue that's this big, and I'm a Korean. It's kind of crazy. Because Jews, especially because we have been a diaspora people for 2,000 years, you can't pin us down into one ethnic group or one race. So the idea that you're a race is almost always going to be used against you in some bad way, and it's not the identifier. And so for me, I had trouble though, because I didn't look Jewish in the kind of the American mainstream white way, and that would always be, a problem in terms of people's kind of relationship with me, especially when I was younger, and probably my own sense of like fitting in. People say though, if we're not a peoplehood, and if I don't really believe in the religion, then what binds us together? And that's a really key question. Like, you probably ask that as Koreans too. Like, okay, so we're not living in Korea anymore. Is it just a bloodline? Is it just the way I look? Is there something real that like actually draws and binds us all together? And what is the substance of that? So on the one hand, one of the things we talk about all the time, there's this phrase from the Jewish Talmud that says, every Jew is responsible for one another. Meaning that like we really do feel that we are one community or one people that are spread around the world, but we are united and we're responsible for one another and we're connected in some way. When I think about it now, I think you want to get to something more substantive. So part of what I think about a lot is like, how do we make it more than just like, we share a Korean food or a Jewish food or something that's very surface. How do you get to something deeper? Like, I feel like we really need that Jewish idea right now. And so one of the things we talk about is like, these are qualities that you recognize in Jews around the world, like countercultural, it's iconoclastic, it reverses the norms of structure and hierarchy. That is like built into the culture. So I think that those pieces, that's the kind of stuff that I think you can build a connection on. Something real that's worth preserving. I think all the time, like, I'm not here to preserve Judaism just for its own sake. I want to preserve it because there's something worth preserving. Like, I think there's something that Judaism brings to the world that is powerful, that I find so meaningful, that like, I really want my children and other people to learn it. So we have to think about that with Korean culture as well. There are things about Korean culture and that go beyond the surface stuff, that are deep and powerful. That's the stuff we want to preserve. That's what we want to share. That should be what connects me to someone who's in Korea. That I think is, we want to get to that higher level of like the deep values that bind us together as a community.
Let me ask you to sing.
We're going to sing Arirang. I'm super proud of being Korean. Arirang, arirang, araio. Arirang 거기로 넘어간다. 나를 버리고 가신 님은 심히도 못 가서